China's initial response to the coronavirus received praise, but now with the accusations of cover-ups, crackdowns, and even forced quarantines beginning to mount, is China trying to shut down coronavirus whistleblowers?
Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson were down in Australia. They're filming Baz Luhrmann's new movie about Elvis Presley. Now Tom Hanks has just tweeted just moments ago.
The entire globe is trying to come to terms with this new way of life. The LA mayor, they're announcing a sweeping safer-at-home order requiring tens of millions of America's second.
They will be advancing their new conspiracy theory and their newest hope. We're going to call out anyone and everyone who's using this virus as a political.
Most of us have gone through a similar journey when it comes to the coronavirus. Whether it's the slow responses and the tendency we see for cover-ups, say in China, the awkward back and forth from our own government, the politicization of how Washington is going to respond, and those in the media trying to cast blame in one area or another. We've had our own progression in our mindset, and how that has evolved from what probably began as a curiosity and then evolved into a concern to denial, from denial to a recognition that this is going to affect all of our everyday lives, even if we never contract the disease itself. Empty shelves at the grocery stores, vacant streets and highways, shuttered schools, canceled church services, gatherings of 10 or more people have been all but forbidden. It feels unprecedented, and in many ways it is, but for years we've worried about the possibility of a global pandemic. Maybe you remember SARS or Ebola, and those were deadly diseases. They were very contagious, but they weren't this contagious. And so while the coronavirus does not have a mortality rate as high as many diseases, it spreads so quickly and has spread so widely that it threatens to overwhelm our medical infrastructure and take more lives than it would if the disease could be slowed down. And that, more than any other reason, is why we are being encouraged to stay at home. It was in the 2nd century that the Roman Empire faced a plague that killed 5,000 Roman subjects every day. The Roman Empire was ill-equipped to manage this plague crisis. The plague was so contagious and fast-acting that the sick were often shunned. Ever heard the phrase, avoided like the plague? But Christians continued to care for one another when they were sick, even when it meant contracting the disease and dying themselves. Indeed, they began to provide the same kind of care for non-Christians. Church historians generally agree that the rapid spread of Christianity in the 2nd century was largely due to the church's response to the plague. The selfless courage displayed by those who risked their lives to love their neighbors as themselves changed their world. The bubonic plague swept across the world and killed as many as 200 million people. This is at a time when a high estimate of the world population was 475 million. Again, Christians were encouraged to be courageous and care for the sick as though they were Christ himself. Is this the same kind of situation? Should Christians ignore the calls to quarantine themselves in their homes? Should fear stop us from worshiping together? Fear would be a shameful reason to stop gathering together to worship our Lord. If Christians under the threat of persecution from their governments refuse to stop meeting together, why should the threat of germs lead us to cancel our services? But in this case, we need to ask, why was the church asked to have courage? Was it not because the second of the greatest commands, to love your neighbor as yourself? Well, in this case, to love our neighbors as ourselves, that means that we must inconvenience ourselves and refrain from meeting together. So in this moment, we're not called to bravery or courage. We're called to place our love of others above our own self-interests. If not our safety, than interests like our work and income, like what groceries we have available in our homes, some of our modern conveniences, or some of our favorite forms of entertainment. Incomes are going to be impacted. It's going to impact most those who live off of hourly wages or are contract workers or run small businesses. Loving our neighbors is likely going to mean that we all have to make some personal sacrifices. Grocery stores are currently madhouses. It was Thursday when Kara went to H-E-B at 35 in Valley Mills. She went before 8 o'clock when they were going to open, thinking she would be one of the first to get some of those supplies that they had restocked overnight. She found a long line. It wrapped around outside along the sidewalk, wrapping around to the end of the sidewalk at the shopping center that's just to the west. When she got in, she found that there were only 2 chicken items and 2 beef items available per customer. The toilet paper that was on the shelves was quickly being purchased by all of those people that she stood in line with. What does loving our neighbor look like at the grocery store? Here, loving our neighbors means refraining from buying items that you do not need right now. If you have a freezer full of meat or a basement full of toilet paper and paper towels like we do, don't go buy it. There are others who need it. Let's remember that to go and purchase a limited supply of things that some people desperately need is about the same as being a company that is gouging their customers by charging ridiculous prices for those same items. Many of the habits that we have established and take for granted have been turned upside down. Has anyone else realized that they eat out more than they think they do? Loving our neighbor means recognizing that one of the ways we've been called to look out for each other is to avoid close contact with another, something we cannot do if we're eating out together. But let's remember what we said earlier about how it's going to affect others' income and purchase takeout so that you can take that meal home and eat it, because some of these businesses are going to be struggling to stay open. And what about entertainment? And what about baseball and the basketball tournament? It was a long stretch of the year in which Baylor had the #1 team in men's and women's basketball. And this is the year they're not going to have the NCAA tournament during this time. Loving our neighbors demands that we place the health and safety of others above our own desire for amusement. The greatest command is to love the Lord your God with everything you are. But the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. That means that loving your neighbor is more important than every other command aside from loving God. It's more important than gathering together to worship. We're not always in situations in which we're called to courage or to bravery, but we're always in a situation in which we have been called to selflessness. We are always in a situation in which we've been called to love our neighbors. I hope that by practicing this love of neighbor, God can use this time to form all of us into more selfless people who know how to love Him by loving others.
After the last tear falls, after the last secret's told, after the last bullet tears through flesh and bone, after the last child starves and the last girl walks the boulevard, After the last year that's just too hard, there is love, 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 love. There is love, 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 love. There is love. After the last disgrace, after the last lie to save some face, after the last brutal jab from a poisoned tongue, after the last dirty politician, after the last meal down at the mission, after the last lonely night in prison, there is love, 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 love. There is love. And in the end is oceans and oceans of love and love again. We'll see how the tears that have fallen were caught in the palms of the giver of love and the lover of all. And we'll look back on these tears as old tales. 'Cause after the last plan fails, after the last siren wails, after the last young husband sails off to join the war,